Hi guys, today at the SilverSabres Combat Academy we're discussing the rules for your new open tournaments. So can you tell me the basics of how the scoring works?
The scoring system we've decided to implement is a deductive system as opposed to an accumulative one. And so what that means is the fighters start with a number of hit points, say 4, 7, 8 or whatever, and they fight until all of those hit points have been lost. That's a different approach to the traditional way of doing combat or competition, where the fighters are trying to accumulate as many points as possible.
Yeah, and it's much more like computer game thing with you're running out of lives or HP, which I think adds a bit more drama to it as well, because you know you've only got the one life left.
I mean, it's a beautiful shift away from a competition mentality and much more to thinking about self-preservation. So we are trying very hard to maintain a very realistic sort of context to what we're trying to do. And we know they're just plastic sabres, but essentially what they let us do is they let us explore the art of swordplay correctly. And by having a deductive scoring system, all of a sudden you're not just thinking about running in there and doing your thing. You're thinking, well, hang on, how am I going to come out of this alive with all of my health and all my points intact? And it's just a joy to see even sort of 8-year-olds get it, and it changes the way that they play, it changes the way they approach the entire art form.
Because your score at the end of this is the remaining HP that you have. So rather than adding up points by attacking, you're actually maintaining your points by putting on a good defence as well. So it requires a lot more tactical thinking.
That's right, exactly. You don't win the tournament potentially on the number of fights that you've won, but the amount of points you have left after those engagements. So that encourages a more considered approach to your fight. Somebody who fights more cleanly without taking hits in order to get hits is going to have the advantage over somebody that's prepared to trade blows, for example. So it's a complete mind shift away from this, I can just go in, take some lower grade hits in order to get more points on my opponent.
It's much more realistic that way, because someone actually chops your arm off in a fight. You don't just consider that nothing. It's actually got some weight in this particular regard.
Essentially, you win by not dying.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think that applies to a lot of life, in fact.
Yeah. What we see as a direct consequence of deductive scoring is a huge reduction in the number of simultaneous hits and the number of times that people both rush in blindly, gambling, hoping to be successful. Instead, we see strategic, thoughtful dialogue between the two fighters.
Because different body parts are worth different points as well.
Different strike zones on the body, and each zone or area will give you a different number of points for being struck. So places like the head, which is a critical strike area.
Less so for me, but yeah.
Yeah, and me. Will mean you'll lose 3 points. And also something quite revolutionary and probably controversial is we've decided to also include the groin as a strike area. Now, bearing in mind we're fighting semi-contact, and if you've got protection in that area, the contact isn't quite as bad as you think it would be. We have tested it. So if you get struck in the head in a real fight, if you take a blow to the head or a good blow to the head, that's potentially your fight over. The same with the groin, and you're looking really in the area of the femur artery, which was a prime strike zone in combat. Again, you're going to bleed out in a few minutes and your fight is over.
Seconds,
So those zones sort of reflect the vulnerability and the lethality of being hit in those areas. Then you have the limbs, which we have given 1 point to, so you get struck on the limbs, you lose a point. And the torso is 2 points. So if you get struck on the torso, you lose 2 points. So those different values allow you to apply some tactical approach to your fighting and your scoring.
So in a combat situation, people can strike simultaneously. How is that scored?
They could both die at the same time.
Very realistic. That's a good approach.
They've got a certain number of hits. They've got 4 hits. If they both hit each other's heads at exactly the same time, then the fight stops because it's a mortal blow, and they have got 1 hit left each. If they come in and do exactly the same thing again, in the pools, for example, they're both dead. They both walk away with 0 points, right? And it's their own fault, quite frankly.
So it's down to a referee to judge if one blow was before the other, or if they are simultaneous.
There are two protocols which we quickly look at here. First of all, did the first attack complete itself before the second attack began. And if that is the case, then there is no simultaneous hit, the one that began first and delivered first clearly. And then the second thing is in the event that they both were in motion at the same time, but one was just so much later than the other, then the referee could declare that even though the first one and the second one started at the same time, the second wouldn't have been able to complete because there was just not enough in it.
But it is possible to do a double KO.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which I think was probably quite rare, but be quite a thing to watch. I look forward to seeing that.
Remember, in a double KO, there are no winners, there are only losers. So don't do it, kids. Look after yourself. Stay alive.
So for the minor cuts on the limbs and the major cuts on the body, the fight continues. But for the mortal cuts on the heads and groins, you have a reset.
That's right. Yes, that's it. And that's cut and to sort of reflect the severity of being struck in those areas. If you've been struck in the head, your fight is pretty much over. You can consider it done. If you get struck in the limbs or arguably in the torso, there's still some fight left in you. There's no reason to break up the fight or stop the fight at that point and then restart it. This also works well for the audience and the fighters because it means they can build a continuation of attacking flow or defensive flow if they're defending.
Because it means there's a tactic involved, because if you were to strike a mortal area, there's a reset, but if you were to go for a limb and then onto a mortal cut, you can potentially take someone out in one series of movements.
Exactly, yeah. In a series of combinations, you could win that fight without there having to be a stoppage, and that's much more interesting. I think it allows you to employ a more tactical approach to your cuts.
And it rewards people that have tactics. It rewards people that are thinking about the moves they're making and the way they want to play their game, as opposed to people who are just going in trying to go for headshot after headshot.
Accumulate as much points as possible. Head cut, restart. Head cut, restart. It's not really very interesting. Whereas if you're rewarding the fighter with the opportunity to put in combinations and maintain the flow of the fight, that's going to be more rewarding from their point of view, technically, and also obviously from an audience's perspective as well. So,
I like the fact that's almost more of a computer game metaphor as well, because it's like the combo move versus a special move, and you have to think about when to unleash them.
One of the things that's guided us through this whole process is we teach kids. And we like seeing those children in tournament doing well. The rules have to make sense to them. There's no point in having a huge document for them to try and absorb. This is one page of rules, and they get it, and you see them thinking.
They know them. This is things that they know. Is things anyone that's played Street Fighter understands, like how this works.
You're giving the competition some kind of relevant context for the age that you're in, which I think is quite important, because as Faz says, we are... With the youth that's coming through now, the younger people that are coming through, they spend a lot of their time playing video games. I know my two boys do, and they often talk in the context of video games, even when they're playing not on the consoles, but actually just playing together. They'll say, my character's got so many hit points and this sort of doom, and then the other one's got some kind of counter to it, and they just escalate in their invulnerability. But, that mindset is very much a thing of the 21st century.
Well, there's a reason why that system has been adopted by all these computer games, and it's because it makes sense, it's logical, it's easy to pick up, and it just is something that's going to make sense to everyone very easily. And it's very fun. There's very, very fun to take your opponent's last hit point as well. I think that's definitely something to be said for that.
The opportunity to turn around and tell the opponent to finish him.
So in order for a strike to count, you need to have 90 degrees in the arc of the cut. Can you explain that one?
Yeah, so arc of cut is basically the travel of the cutting edge into my opponent's body. Okay. Now, the minimum range of travel that we would consider a blade needs to travel in order to do any kind of cutting or contact damage is 90 degrees. So from here, going forwards into the side of the body, or into the head, or whatever you're striking. Okay. Every cut that you deliver has to be chambered at least to 90 degrees, which means it has to be brought back at least to a 90-degree position before it can go forwards into any kind of offending action. What you tend to see happening sometimes with sabre combat is a cut has been delivered, okay, it's finished, and the edge is still forwards, and then instead of chambering the edge back to deliver another cut, they will do this sort of pointy, thrusty, pokey thing.
Because it looks like fun, but it's not valid.
It could be that there are many reasons why people may do that, but the point is that for a cut to have any kind of power, obviously, it has to travel through some kind of angle before it strikes the body. Now, typically when I fight, I'll be sort of chambering a bit further back because my instinct is just to bring the sabre back as much as possible to get as nice, big, cleaving arc of cut as possible onto my opponent. And it also helps with the speed and the flow. So that's why we've chosen that range of angle for the arc of cut, for a blow or cut to be valid.
It's also pretty simple for a referee to judge it as well.
Because you have a referee and then a secondary referee as well to judge the...
Two sub-refs and a main referee. And between the three of them, they have to be absolutely sure that that cut was valid and worthy of scoring a point. And, the human brain understands 90 degrees. It's pretty straightforward. You just see it, you recognise it, and you move on.
Yeah, and it looks beautiful as well when you see sabres moving properly and having flow and that kind of magical dance that lightsabers do before they chop your head off.
That's it, exactly. That blur of light is quite a nice thing to see, and we want to try and accentuate that as much as possible. So that arc of cut helps that, but also obviously it has actual combat relevance as well.
And as well as the arc of cut having to be sufficient to cause a blow, you also have to have your wrists in the correct positions as if it were a real sword.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we base all of our techniques on actual sword techniques. And when you're cutting with a sword, you have to ensure that your cutting edge is in line with the surface you're striking. So in this instance here, you can see that my knuckles are leading what would be the true edge of the sword blade into your body. So that would be a valid strike.
Thank you for that. I'm very dead now. Carry on.
Conversely, if my wrist is in this position, this would equate to the flat of the sword blade. So
and it's not got the same control or power.
It doesn't have any power. I mean, you can't cut with the flat of a sword blade. It's just going to be striking or slapping the target. It's not going to do any kind of damage, really.
Yeah. No slapping with your lightsabers. It has to be true cuts.
No spanking. Yeah, cutting is what we want.
This ties in beautifully with the idea that we require... I mean, we are a semi-contact art. We're not interested in seeing how strong people are, how brutal they are, how aggressive they are. We want people to be mindful. We want to see them bringing their thinking and expressing that through the sabre. And that is all about control.
So the sport is semi-contact, which means you wear protective gear and the cuts are controlled and they're pulled blows. Could you explain what that means?
So the reason for semi-contact engagement is that we can indulge in the sport or the martial art without having to use high grades of protection. Okay.
So it's more accessible, but it still has a combat sport element, but without being quite so dangerous and needing as much expensive gear, I guess.
Absolutely right. So you have that aspect of it, the control aspect of it, as well comes into play. So the ability to control how hard you hit something is a fundamental martial technique and skill that needs to be developed. It's not just a case of whacking something as quickly and hard as possible. That's not really how a sword works, as an example. Something else, you may have to do that, but in the context of a sword, there's only a certain amount of weight that you have to put into a cut to make it effective. That's just the nature of the beast. And also in combat, when you're using things like the principle of deception, where you're looking to potentially redirect the force and weight of your blow to manoeuvre around the defence of your opponent, there's no point putting all of your weight into a cut if you need to redirect it elsewhere. So it's a good foundation to develop the ability to control what you're doing, and that control is quite an important aspect of any martial practice.
So how would you define what was a glancing blow or a pulled cut?
Well, a pulled cut, the sound that it makes is very distinct from a full contact blow. So, I mean, as a referee, it's very easy to recognise the change in tone when the sabres come into contact with either each other or with the target. But, I mean, it's fairly evident. I have within my arm some bones, and a pulled cut won't affect them. The blow is retarded at the point of contact with the application of my mind.
It's very much on the surface. You're looking to strike the surface as opposed to strike through whatever it is you're hitting.
And that's the element where this is sport and we're not allowed to actually chop each other up with lightsabers. I can see why that would be a limitation. It's probably the best for insurance purposes, to be honest. But it still allows you to show all the control, the moves, and be in a real competitive environment.
So, absolutely. It doesn't really inhibit your ability to use a full range of technique. You just have to use it for a little bit more control. And that will possibly mean that the technique is executed a little more slowly, but it doesn't.
But it also means you have to have slightly more precision and skill and control over every move. These moves aren't going to be lucky blows for a lot of it. You have to really think about how you are placing your sabre and how you are making that contact.
Well, exactly. In terms of scoring a point with the sabre, this is the point of the blade, and if the point just skims the target, even though it's made contact, as a referee, I wouldn't grant that. I wouldn't allow that to score because it's just a graze. Again, we're not seeing a conclusive blow that would clearly render this person into two pieces, and that's what we're after in terms of the theatrical side of the experience for the audience. So also a glancing shot, if the blade touches but it doesn't actually enter into the target, instead it glances along the surface. Again, as a referee, I may not elect to award that simply because there wouldn't have been any actual incision.
So there's no restriction on the angles and things you can use for cuts, but I believe there's no thrusts?
That's right, yes.
Yep, it's pretty simple. On a cut, the blade will flex. On a thrust, the blade will not flex.
So it's a simple safety precaution in this regard?
Again, without using heavy plated armour of some sort, that's going to completely disperse the blow. There's too much of a potential for internal hemorrhaging with a thrust with these weapons. We just don't allow it.
And it's a similar thing with unarmed contact, because you can disarm somebody, but when they are unarmed, they are going for their sabre rather than allowed to use other moves.
If people, internally in our own tournament sort of rules, we might permit that, but for open tournament where we can't guarantee that everybody has sufficient training to look after their opponent and make sure that they don't accidentally snap their neck by dropping them off their back or something, it's just easier just to say there's no unarmed techniques permitted in open combat.
Yeah, it's a safety consideration at the end of the day.
And it keeps the focus on the lightsabers, and let's face it, lightsabers are the thing that everyone has come to see and play with.
So, like you said, you do have the opportunity to disarm your opponent. Now, the disarming is normally done via a binding technique where you've been able to put a lot of force on your opponent's blade and it has levered the weapon out of the opponent's hand. Following a disarm, you need to follow up with some kind of attack. So you've got to strike them with a cut, obviously. It's not no good just to disarm them. You've got to finish them off.
Finish them!
But we're not having a situation where people will close to close distance and then try and wrestle a sabre out of somebody's hands.
Yes, quite.
That's not what's happening.
Yeah, that would be quite a different sport,
that
really.
That would be completely different tone.
Yeah, that's not what we're doing. That's not what LED Sabre is about.
The play area has what I'm calling the floor is lava rule, where if you go out of bounds, you actually lose 2 hit points.
We haven't fixed what the penalty is, but basically, if you step outside the zone, you take a penalty to your life meter. You lose hit points as a result. If stepping out and burn to a crisp,
which can happen. We've all seen the prequels. We've seen the prequels.
and so don't do that. Don't step outside the area. The referees will, and if someone deliberately runs out of the area, then the referee might even issue a yellow card for unsportsmanlike.
I mean, it's a safety concern as well as it would be a cheap way to try and evade, because you can't have people with the weapons too far out the area where you might have large crowds watching as well.
Well, exactly. If the opponent is following you out of that space to keep on hitting you, suddenly you're in the crowd, and it's like a bit too much of a personal experience at that point.
At that point, you know which one is definitely a Sith of the battle.
Exactly. Yeah. So absolutely, and that has to be. People have to also be aware of their combat space. They should be if they've had any kind of training. So that just helps to reaffirm people's capability and competence, and if they step out, they get penalised for it. You say the degree of that, the level of the penalising number can be subject to whatever people want.
We can change that.
That's a variable, but you will get penalised.
So the rules of the tournaments can be quite flexible then?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've got, the foundation of the fundamental format of the deductive scoring, that's fixed. But what you build around that format is entirely up to you. The variety and variation is really only sort of limited to your imagination. I mean, there's so many things you can potentially do with the tournament structure. We've only just scratched the surface of potentially what we can do.
We've got alternative sort of games that could form competitive formats as well. They're all waiting to emerge. It's about fun. It's about making it fun.
And this is the foundation groundwork for something that could be quite expansive as a series of tournament styles.
If somebody wants to have three rounds per match, then fine. If somebody wants to make it 8 hit points per match, then fine. Get back to us. Tell us how that works. What we want is an experience where people can turn up with their families, watch an entire tournament in a discrete period of time.
So the fights don't have a specific timer set to them?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The simple fact of the matter is that, again, we want the fighters to fight. The people are here to watch a match. We don't want to have someone jump in, deliver a simple, small, minor wound and jump back out and wait for the timer to expire so that they can win on points that way. What we want is we want fighters to enter the ring knowing that the only way that they can leave that is if there's a conclusion where one person's hit points have reached 0.
Final.
Yeah,
that makes sense, and that again ensures that it's tactics that are being used which are entertaining, I think is probably the best word for it, and fun as well for the players, because there's nothing, going back to a street fight metaphor, there's nothing more annoying than the person that just keeps jumping in the corner and avoiding the blows rather than actually engaging in the combat. So I guess it just ensures that people are engaging with each other because of the way the rules are set up. They encourage fights to be fought in a way that is both atmospheric, fun, tactical, but also sort of naturally has a time limit in some ways.
Even amongst the younger participants, we're seeing now when they really start thinking about what they're doing and being tactical and applying the technology that they've learned, that the fights might go as long as 2 or 3 minutes, but that's kind of the exception. Equally, there are some fights that are over in 5 seconds. But again, they are the exception. We normally see somewhere between 45 and 90 seconds.
Which is quite reflective of real combat again as well.
That's pretty typical, to be honest, fights in 45 seconds to a minute range. Once the two combatants have decided that they're going to finish their opponent, that fight's going to be over pretty quickly. You've got a few seconds or so moving around, your opponent maybe going through different guard positions, trying to gain the advantage of the high ground, and then the
like how you got that in there.
then the assault begins, and then after in that phase of the fight, it's normally over in sort of 20 to 30 seconds.
So these tournaments are open, which means anyone with a certain level of ability can join, but there are regulations on the type of sabre they can use?
Yep, absolutely. The blades are limited to 92 centimetres in length. They are limited to 2 millimetres of wall thickness. The points have to be rounded. We're not having any bullet points, sorry folks. We're not having any heavy grade sabres either.
And that's just for a mixture of fairness and safety?
Again, if someone does zig when they should have zagged and accidentally hits too hard, a heavy grade sabre could deliver enough kinetic energy easily to break a bone. So it's just not necessary. Certainly if we're only working on a semi-contact level. If we were to go for a full contact format, then maybe we'd look at heavy grades, but we're just not.
But that would be more of a specific subset of the tournaments, whereas these open ones, you need to maintain that everyone's on an equal footing. If someone turns up with a blade 10 times longer than someone else, that's kind of not fair. If you've got a pole vault, and equally you need to make sure they're strong enough not to shatter.
That's it.
And have that flex and
So and the overall length we've decided to limit to 125 centimetres for now. We might change that depending on what people come up with, which obviously means that somebody can have a longer hilt, but they'll have to sacrifice blade length in order to actually pull that off. So with the limit on the blades and the type of blade you can use, the only thing left is that the sabre hilts themselves have to be safe. This means if you've got any strange pieces with points and sharp things on them.
Looking at all you Sith aficionados out there.
If you happen to trip and land on your own hilt and it punctures a lung, That's no use. That's no use. So make sure you can have those pieces and put them on your shelves and display them when you're cosplaying and stuff, but in competition you need to have a competition or a tournament standard hilt.
And also the simpler hilts, the more streamlined hilts are often the easier ones to wield.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so it's to your advantage to have something that's a bit more streamlined.
Yeah. There's no frills. no need for any of that stuff.
No frills, just beautiful lightsabers.
Yep. Yes. It's not the hilts that are on display, it's the people that are wielding them. Yeah, it's the art. The art is in the user. We do have some amazing bespoke pieces and stuff, but you know what? Once they're in your hands, you can't see them. So just get a nice, simple, strong, durable. We want the lights on for the fights, please. We don't want to have people fighting with just sort of polycarbonate tubes. A good, simple, sturdy blade with a plain hilt, and that's a tournament blade. That's a tournament sabre.
Well, I've learnt a lot today about how the rules for the open tournaments works. I look forward to losing to you guys horribly when I'm a little more competent at this. We're going to put a link in the description below to look up the rules and when tournaments are happening on your guys' website, which is silver-sabres.com. And if you subscribe to this channel, we're going to have more videos explaining all of the awesome stuff to do with the Silver Sabres Combat Academy. And we'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
Right, I think we should start some fighting now.
Cool.
So what happened... Pointing at each other.
Simultaneous pointing.
I pointed first. No.
Are you quite finished?
You're dead.
Now, children, please. Let's pretend to be serious. It's very serious business hitting people with light-up sticks, I have you know.
You've had undivided attention from me.
That's not bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Run onto the lava. Don't run onto the lava.
But bring marshmallows.
If you are going to run onto the lava, bring marshmallows. That's interesting, however.
Or piri-piri sauce.
Oh, no.
You just made it all a bit wrong.